Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore. Warhammer is known for all of its wacky factions, from the graceful and majestic Eldari to the brutalistic and merciless orcs. And of course, who can forget everyone's fan favorite Adeptus Astartes. Yet with all these big, beautiful, awesome, amazing factions, some of the more cooler yet obscure ones often don't get as much love as they should. And one such faction is the Adeptus Arbites, aka Judge Dredd 40k. No, but literally. But how do these guys function? Are they really that OP? Do they really have power armor and bolters? And did the first of their kind ever turn against the Emperor himself? All these questions and more answered in today's Warhammer 40k lore video, as we take a look at the Adeptus Arbites. Also super hyped for the Darktide thing. Alright, so first thing first, before we can start covering the Adeptus Arbites lore in all of its entirety, let's address the elephant in the room. This is Judge Dredd. Made famous by the OG Judge Dredd movie starring Sylvester Stallone way back when in like the 90s, I think? And then of course the absolute gem that was the early 2010s version. Really good movie. And this is in Adeptus Arbites Judge. Yes, they are actually called judges both in the old lore and in the new lore. As you can imagine, they look rather similar. Now this isn't a classic case of GW taking inspiration from another IP, but GW actually working with another IP. You see, Games Workshop had the rights to create Judge Dredd miniatures as a role-playing game in 1985, and they continued all the way up until 1992. But they would then lose their license supposedly around 95, give or take. And the range was pretty extensive. It went beyond Judge Dredd of itself and included anything from the 2000 AD comics. That being a set of comic books taking place in the Judge Dredd universe, including Strontium Dogs and Rogue Trooper. Again, two things also take place from that universe. So they were pretty invested. But then all of a sudden, GW had a bunch of Judge Dredd minis, but then they didn't have the license to make them as Judge Dredd. So what do? You repurpose, you reapprove, and you slap on a fresh coat of paint and bang, brand new thing. And lo and behold, the Adeptus Arbites were born. And they were shown in the original Rogue Trader rulebook as part of the Adeptus Terra, alongside the Adeptus Custodes, Mechanicus, Astronomica, Astra Telepatha, and the Administratum, as well as the Assassinorum. Basically, all those super cool unique stuff that wasn't Space Marines were grouped together as the Adeptus Terra. So, basically, we're going to be dividing this video into two separate sections. The first section is going to be very simply the OG lore. That be from Rogue Trader and 2nd edition. After that, there was a bit of a retcon and changing of the judges and the Arbites and their stories, and that's where we get the modern day Adeptus Arbites lore, the one that's going to be used for Darktide. Again, very hyped by that. But without any further ado, ladies and gents, let's start off with the OG lore from 1987's Rogue Trader. Shout out to fellow YouTuber Chocobeef for allowing me to use some footage of her absolutely rendering the righteous law of the Lex under these unjust heathens of Hive Tertium. The Adeptus Arbites, more commonly known as judges, were the martial arm of the Adeptus Terra. More particularly, they were the soldiers and the police force of said organization. Now, in the Imperium, most worlds do their own policing, and then they have some type of police force, and then a PDF, and then they may have a guard regiment stationed on there, depending. But should there be such issues in which the Adeptus Terra takes liking to, i.e. a plant having a rebellion, treason, or people overstepping during a feud? Basically, if anything began threatening the bottom line of the Adeptus Terra and the Adeptus Terra did not like it, lo and behold, we sent in the Adeptus Arbites as a universal police force, aka the Adeptus Terra is the government, and the Adeptus Arbites are the goddamn feds. And these guys are feared galaxy-wide, because not only are they literally a mini army, they can also be used as assassinations, intrigue, political espionage, whatever you need. These guys are the heavy-handed hand of the Adeptus Terra, and they are often used. Ruthless, harsh, and they punish failure and incompetence as crimes punishable by death, with every single Arbites being, say it with me, judge, jury, and executioner. Because no one has rights, with only members of the Inquisition as well as the Ecclesiarchy receiving a fair trial, if that. Now while their main headquarters is on Terra, they travel everywhere, and in some cases they can often be seen alongside Imperial commanders. Ostensibly, this is because they are meant to be a police force to set up after the main forces come through and conquer the world and pacify it. And in some unofficial cases, and more often than most, they are there to watch their commander, who may or may not have some relation to the Adeptus Terra, and who may or may not have pissed somebody off in the Senate. Their base layers include leather pants, jacket with padded knees and elbows, heavy gloves, as well as thick hide boots, in addition to a simplified version of the Custodes helmet. Yeah, that Custodes. Now underneath all this is a base armor mesh, but carapace is used, in addition to power armor for some of their elite formations. Yes, the feds have power armor, but the base army doesn't. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's always so funny to me. They have the ability to use every and all weapons available to them. And of course, Their two main weapons are of course the iconic bolt pistol and the Executioner class shotgun. Again, the Judge Dredd inspiration is very, very, very heavy-handed. Calling it inspiration is a bit of a stretch. This is basically one-to-one, but goddamn it was it cool. Bloody love the 80s. But they also have access to plasma, flamer, las weapons, but interestingly enough, they didn't have any of the unique power/shock moles yet. But we do know that any and all melee weapons were available to them. Most notably, we see them being depicted with the power axe. Also again, some of the elite formations, as well as the officers, did have access to refractor fields, but those were a bit on the rarer end. And of course, if all the training, the power armor, and the goddamn bolt pistol fails, there's good old Freeze-On, aka combat drugs, motherfucker. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, Horse Tranquilizer still exists. Now this is basically their law in 1st edition, aka Rogue Trader. They're basically Judge Dredd, but 40k-ified. Now, during 2nd edition, they will be reintroduced and refined, like pretty much every single concept of the original Warhammer Rogue Trader. And we see that there is a lot of big changes that really do set them apart from the original Judge Dredd. First off, the Judge was a character, aka an elite squad. He was no longer just rank and file. And here in 1993, we get introduced with the first ever Arbitrator squads. These were models that had a Judge, aka Champions, which were the elite versions, joined the Arbitrators, which was the standard rank and file. And these models came with bolters, shotguns, grenade launchers, and we finally see the addition of the iconic power maul and suppression shield, along with other specialist equipment. So in terms of their role, it did stay pretty much the same. They were the galactic law enforcement of the Imperium. Again, akin to a type of federal police, with, as I mentioned before, arbitrators being the standard judge, rank and file, being equipped and armed with the carapace and the shotgun, and then of course you had the judges, the higher rank. Those were the elites, which usually could be armed with power armor or bolt weapons. Now again, there is no super ultra detailed specifics to it, but this is what makes sense to me. Or it could be that an arbitrator could get power armor and a bolter. They didn't really think that far ahead. Again, this is me trying to make sense of it, but hey, just take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But they are fanatically loyal and utterly devoted to the enforcement of the imperial government, or the imperialis lex, or the law of the Imperium. And just like in 1st edition, if you did something that they did not like, they being the Adeptus Terra, the Arbites would pay you a visit. Governor doing a bad job? They visit. Don't pay taxes? They visit. Don't pay enough taxes? They visit. And each judge is equipped to wage a minor war, but overall they are supposed to maintain order. Again, it's a classic case of speak softly, but carry a big old fucking stick, which in this case is basically a 40mm gyrojet propelled grenade launcher. At the seat of the Adeptus Terra, they would also keep the Great Book of Judgment. Judgment? Grudges! Now this is basically the legal code of the Imperium, and this got super big over the millennia. So much so that it's not just one single tome, and there are parts in it that is written with human skin in some type of forgotten language, and apparently every single day 100 new volumes of the code are added via hollow encoder. On Terra, there are said to be tens of thousands of books tended by legal assistant to aid judges. Basically, the law system is even more of a fucked up mess than it is today. Somehow. Again, this is something from 2nd edition that just goes to show that while 40k was definitely trying to become more serious, they definitely lead into the, yeah, this is the grim, crazy darkness of the far future. But the first main distinction we get between 1st and 2nd is that they do not care about the crimes of individual citizens. They only deal with super serious stuff like rebellion. Again, whereas in 1st edition they were the police force of Terra itself, now again they are much more the case of we are the serious boys to get the serious shit done when and when needed. Another thing that changes is that they often do corrupt things for themselves out of lust or power or just for money. Now this is something that is directly different to the 1st edition. And an interesting fact about this one, this is the only iteration in which corruption has ever been associated with the Arbites. Another thing that made them very unique in 2nd edition is that they commanded their own armies. It's no longer the case of the judges and the Arbites are their own unique units. No, it's like they actually have personal armies at the command. But then again, we go back to the trend of 2nd edition adding super cool things for the judges that became very iconic in the modern day. That being the idea of precincts, aka military bases. And they also have fortified courthouses where people sometimes wait so long that actual queue wars begin to develop in which the Arbites have to maintain shock troops to break up. Again, this is 2nd edition trying to be more serious, but also being fucking dumb at the same time. I love it, dude. 2nd edition is such a vibe. But 2nd edition also expanded the roles of the Arbites and what they were capable and able to do. They had specialized groups for patrolling the underways of a hive city, execution teams for hunting the guilty, and detectives who tracked cyber criminals. Again, a little bit of a Cyberpunk 2049 over there. In addition to this, we have the Marshal of the Court, who makes judgments and hear audiences. In one example, a Marshal of the Court had 100 arbitrators under him, and as the system they were in was on the very edge of rebellion, he would send a request to the judge's reinforcement so he could clobber the governor who refused to pay his tithes. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for Judge Dredd 2.0 Warhammer 40k edition. Again, it's very interesting taking a look at the OG Judge Dredd from Rogue Trader, which is literally just Judge Dredd. The Adeptus Arbites are Judge Dredd in 40k. But as I said before, like all things in 2nd edition, it took the original concept from Rogue Trader and developed it into something unique. And as we're going to see in the newer and current canon editions, there are a lot of stuff that was very much so kept, but one or two unique aspects that were completely dropped from 2nd edition. But all in all, 2nd edition worked so that the current Adeptus Arbites could run. It gave us all of the most iconic things, including the Cyber Puppo, the shotgun, the bolt pistol, and the shock maul. Not to mention, it solidified what the Adeptus Arbites was supposed to be, a galactic police force in the midst of Warhammer 40k. But that is the old lore that is not canon really anymore. So with all that context out of the way, let's talk about the modern canon lore of the Adeptus Arbites in Warhammer 40k. The Adeptus Arbites find their origins during the Imperium's history, when Mr. Malcador the Sigillite created the Lord Civilian to rule over the pieces of land. Now this is basically on Terra before the whole Great Crusade and their unification wars and all that. And these would be overseen by 4 High Lords, who outranked them and oversaw the government as each parts, divided into 4 particular units, known as the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Armies, the Master of the Administratum, the Provost Marshal of the Adeptus Arbites, and the Chancellor of the State Imperium. Now back then, it was unknown if these High Lords were supposed to last, or they were to be changed out, put back on lower, or the government structure was like the previous Lord Civilian. It wasn't really known that much. But these are the current 4 High Lords during the final ends of the reunification wars on Terra. We have Novum Reta, the First Master of the Administratum, Pelopus Dragvor, the Chancellor of the Imperial Estate, Kilsan Wea, the Lord Commander Militant, and Uwomi Kandawaya, the Provost Marshal. Now, it's the last one that we gotta take a look at, because this little lady here was a very, very, very important part, and this is an often very unlooked part of the Imperium that many people do forget about. And it really goes a long way to characterize the Imperium and the Emperor in of itself. You see, Provost Marshal Kandawaya, however, took it upon herself to investigate some of the more mysterious nonsense of the Imperium. Most notably, the sudden disappearance of the Thunder Warriors. Now, if you don't know about the Thunder Warriors, they were basically the Proto-Astartes, the Mark I first-generation super soldier, known as the Legio Contagious. These Thunder Legions were used by the Emperor to reunify Terra. However, at the end of it, the Emperor, for one reason or another, deemed that they were not worthy of being sent to the stars. So he had the Custodes basically pull a 180 and Among Us them, stabbing them in the back and trying to murder all of them. But it did not work. Some of them would escape, led by their Primarch Ushotan. Primarch not in the sense of the actual Legion Primarchs of the Space Marines, but rather in the sense of being a general of an army. You see, Miss Kandawaya would find all this, she would find Ushotan, and then she would realize what had happened, or what she believed to have happened. That being a palace coup by Constantine Valdor to overthrow the Emperor, or so she thought. She would then lead an attack at the Imperial Palace to confront Valdor and place them under arrest. Sadly though, she doesn't really get what's going on. The Emperor is absolute in his rule. Valdor is, according to law, literally above it all and can't do anything illegal. And we see that first and foremost, this isn't a return to the old order. This is indeed something brand new.
"You have demands,"
said Valdor, equable as ever. Kandawaya moved forwards, unsteadying the gate. "You know what this is about. Crimes against the state. The slaughter of loyal forces in order to keep your grip on Imperial war machine. By authority of my office, you must now relinquish command of the city and open the gates. You will be tried in fair and open court. Your fate determined by the Emperor when he returns."
"I see. And you did not think to serve this summons when last we spoke?"
"Would you have obeyed it?"
"Of course not. That's why we're here. Every fighting soul with a grievance or a thirst for revenge. And there are a lot of those. You couldn't erase us all. Not quite perfect."
Ice-spiked rain swirled across Valdor's golden helm, sluicing like tears down the ornate swashes. His weapon, the immense spear, remained deactivated and sullen in the gloom.
"You have served with the Emperor himself,"
he said, speaking to Ushotan.
"You must see how futile this is."
Ushotan shrugged, sending cascades of rusty runoff shredding from his dented pauldrons.
"More futile than dying from my bad blood? Oh, I don't think so. I like to go out seeing my blade sticking from your spine, Constantine. That would be a good way to go."
"Only if you resist."
"Yes, of course. Only if you resist,"
echoed Ushotan sardonically.
You can walk back with us now, and we can finish this without a shot being fired. But I don't think you'll do that, will you? You know I cannot.
Don't be a fool. The city is unmanned. Your order is scattered by the war. Resistance will only cause bloodshed.
With respect, High Lord, you brought the bloodshed. The deaths this night will be upon your conscience. Conscience? So you can remember what it's like to have one of those, can you?
Stand aside, Captain General. Tell them to open the gates. Your trial will be in accordance with the Lex, and if you are innocent, then you will have nothing to fear.
Innocent. Guilty. I did not think to hear such facile terms from a High Lord. We are the architects of the species' future. No crime could be judged as too heinous if it secured that. No virtue could be forgiven if it hindered it. The Lex is a tool for the control of the psychologically free. It is an expression of his will, and nothing more. You have been a fool to think it more than that. You have served long enough, and honorably, as its protector. Now, your fate is chained to theirs.
Kandawaya held her ground, but Ushitan's huge frame, undaunted, shook with laughter.
Now then, be nice. She has a point. You're a lying, murdering bastard, and we were all supposed to be cracking down on them. You could give her what she wants, and you don't have to watch your city burn. Walk away. This is the one and only chance you will ever have. We both know that's not true. I will take no pleasure in seeing you slain. You take no pleasure in anything. That's because you're a ghoul. But I will end you, Utoshan. Here, if I have to.
The Primarch laughed out loud, throwing his cloak back and sweeping his arm wide across the empty plateau.
Alone? You take us all alone? By the gods, you've become even more insufferable.
You cannot make a stand here, Captain General, added Kandawaya, an edge of desperation in her voice now. Despite all you've tried, all the weapons you brought, we know your numbers are too few. You told me yourself, there are no new armies. All that is left is you, standing here, now, and that is not enough. For a moment, just in the space between breaths, Valdo said nothing. In that instant, he seemed beaten, or maybe resigned, a sliver of pale gold thrust in the heart of the infinite, ink-dark night.
You did not listen to me, High Lord,
he said, finally kindling his great spear.
I told you there would be no new generals.
A halo of silver gold light leapt out of its disruptor, dazzling like forked lightning.
But if you had heeded the lesson I gave you, then you would now know the real truth, that there are many more armies. Armies more deadly and more numerous than any created before.
Ushitan moved to strike, his own blade spitting blood-red plasma, and yet, something stayed his hand. Something stayed the hand of every Thunder Warrior. Amid the roar and thunder of the world's fury, something new could suddenly be detected. Something familiar, yet unfamiliar. Something horrifically dragged out of the past, and yet even more horrifically indicative of the future. There was a whine, a grind of mechanics, a surge of something massive and coordinated out amidst the sensor-baffling chaos of the maelstrom.
You should feel honored. You are present at the very first engagement.
And out of the driving muck of the ice storm, where the snow and hail screamed and the frozen earth cracked, 10,000 helm lenses suddenly ignited, then began to advance. These were the 6 hosts, the uncrowned princes, the Emperor's angels of death, and his Astartes. So, we're gonna pause on the Arbites lore just for a quick second here, because I really want to point out this interaction right here. This is one of the most pivotal interactions in the entirety of the Imperium, and it's one that is often overlooked by pretty much everybody in the lore, because this gives something that we as Warhammer 40k fans so desperately try and look for: context. Generally speaking, when it comes to the running of the Imperium and the Emperor and his ideas, people often ask the question, what is the Emperor like? And this has often been an issue because the Emperor has been written by about 5 separate authors at this point, so his character is a bit of a mess. But here, we have a coherent, unadulterated point of view that shows exactly what the Emperor is and what he wanted for Galaxy. The Emperor is an emperor. We see here and now, in Warhammer 40k, the way that the Imperium is run is very, very, very akin to the old Empire of Rome. Yes, there is administration. Yes, there are many things that we might consider modern in it. But at the end of the day, the Emperor is Primus, the first, or Dominus, the master. He is the living Lord of all. He is in charge of all, and his word is law. It does not matter what you believe. Even someone as high as the Provost Marshal or the Primarch of all the Thunder Legions. If the Emperor decrees you die wholesale. It does not matter. It does not matter one bit. And this is really interesting because yes, while in some cases personal freedoms were more in the Horus Heresy, they really did only apply to the lower echelons. Again, if the Emperor wanted something done, it didn't matter what he said, he would just go against it and do whatever. It's not a case of the Emperor being a hypocrite, it's the case of the Emperor just doing whatever he wanted. He is the Lord and Master. He is the guy. Whatever he said went. And if he decides that what he said yesterday is different from what he's saying today, well then you're just plumb flesh out of luck. And again, it's something that goes to show that we know exactly what the Imperium would look like if the Emperor had continued. Would it be good? Only if the Emperor was good. But the minute the Emperor took a turn for the worse, so would the rest of the Empire. But that was just a really interesting fact I'd like to point out that most people tend to look over. Anyway, back to some shotgun fun. At the start of circa 10th edition, we got the Imperial Agents Codex, which basically outlined everything as the modern canon of the Adeptus Arbites, which goes as follows. The Adeptus Arbites enforce the Lex Imperialis, the imperial law. This is not an organization concerned with low-level crimes, murder, or theft, for they are dealt by local law enforcement. Instead, the Arbites police crimes in the wider Imperium, conspiracies and maleficence that can impact the operation of subsystems or subsectors. The armored arbitrators put down industrial riots that can endanger a planet's production quotas, and root out cults whose activities could provide traitors with a foothold. They close down traffickers bleeding workers away from manufactorum lines, break up cartels that trade in illicit Xenos technology, and move against planetary governors who fail to pay their tithes. The arbitrators uphold a set of laws whose initial coalition is said to have been ordered during the earliest days of the fledgling Imperium. It is claimed in the Adeptus Arbites dogma that many of the oldest and most fundamental tenets of the Lex are direct transcriptions of the Emperor's words. Such provenance carries weight, both to incite zealotry in those who enforce the Lex, and amongst other Imperial agents to view the arbitrators as enforcers of divine legal writ. All but the most unusual Imperial worlds, such as chapter planets, ForgeWorlds, and the like, boast at least one Arbitized precinct fortress. These slab-sided installations serve as bastions, barracks, courthouses, jails, torture chambers, and looming reminders of the authoritating Imperium writ large. With arbitrators owing no loyalty to local power structures, not even planetary governors, these precincts also form the first line of defense in the event of insurrection or heresy. Each precinct is ruled over by a marshal of court, merciless, uncompromising. These figures are well versed in combat strategy and tactics. In the event of cult uprisings, planetary insurrections, or full-fledged interstellar invasion, it is the task of the Marshal of Court to delay the enemy forces long enough for a full Imperial military response to arrive. Of course, Marshals try to prevent such threats from arising in the first place. To this end, they wield the arbitrator squads under their command with a mixture of finesse and brutality. Dawn raids, sudden inspections, remorseless investigations, and drawn-out questionings of subjects both lowborn and noble alike. See the Adeptus Arbites uncover countless threats and exterminate them, with the aid of other Imperial agents, just as the Order Hereticus or the Ecclesiarchy when required. The arbitrators are warriors of Imperial justice, the militant arm of the Marshal's Court. Exempt from prohibitions of operating warpcraft such as planetary governors, must abide by the Arbites. The Adeptus Arbites can deploy and force to a planet, void station, or ship upon which their intelligence has revealed the taint of criminal activities. The largest precinct forces have the power, armories, armored fighting vehicles, and gunships required to wage entire wars if need be, clad in the iconic carapace armor and wielding shock moles, high-tech shotguns, and other potent weapons of oppression. The arbitrators strike with prodigious force. Their mixture of training, quality equipment, and disciplined zeal have seen more than one force of arbitrators hold out in the battlefield conditions, long enough after more conventional forces have departed. And that puts us into pretty good context as to what an arbitrator is. Though it is important to note that judges do indeed still exist in 10th edition. Though it's unknown if this is again, like it was in 2nd edition, a higher rank, which would most likely have the bow pistol and power armor, or it's just something that arbitrators are called. But what we do know is that the Arbites are actually the melee variant, for you have an arbitrator squad, armed with shock mauls as well as suppression shields. But then you also have vigilance squads, which are armed with the Cyber Mastiffs as well as the shotguns. Basically a ranged unit and a melee unit. Now this effect on lore is probably inevitable, as GW was like they did this just for the minis and like that whole weird type of combat patrol. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, the standard Adeptus Arbites Arbitrator is still clad in heavy-duty carapace and armed with gear that is significantly better than the standard Imperial Guard. At the very worst, the base troopers are armed and equipped as Tempestus Scions, or with gear on a similar note, that being the pseudo-power weapons and of course, the heavy carapace. Now, which to a lot of people, that may seem like kind of bullshit. Why on earth does a police force have this type of gear? And even more weird so, if power armor has not yet been retconned, why on earth do they have access to it? Something that Inquisitors only have access to. And I initially was of the same mind until I thought about it. You see, the Adeptus Arbites are significantly smaller than the Guard. The Guard is trillions of quintillions of all human beings. There's so many motherfuckers in the Guard. Therefore, even to equip the standard Tempestus Scion officer with power armor would be such a massive drain. But if you consider something like the Adeptus Arbites, now we don't know how exactly smaller they are compared to the Guard, but I would wager that saying they're a tenth the size, at the very least, is fine. Basically, they're super small, and probably even smaller than a tenth. Meaning that if their elite of elites still have access to power armor, let alone carapace as a base, it's still a significant less drain on resources as it would be the Imperial Guard. Not to mention, and the biggest thing, unlike the Guard, the Arbites are standardized. An Arbites precinct on one world is basically nearly exactly the same on another. Not to mention, Adeptus Arbites are very, very, very loyal. A perfect example is when Mr. Bobby G got back to Terra and the High Lords tried to overthrow him. Spoiler, it did not end well. But basically, Guilliman is back on Terra and he's preparing the Indomitus Crusade. But he's taking zero risks. He doesn't want any criminals, any cults fucking anything up, so he's just like, absolutely no. I'm not having any of this corrupt rubbish interfering in my stuff. So the Adeptus Custodes, the Inquisition, the Adeptus Arbites, the Ecclesiarchy, and the official Assassinorium, together with Bobby G and whatever space marines he have, basically decide to go on a crusade on Terra. And they all gather together around a healthy, heresy-free friendship bonfire and sang Kumbaya. Except the bonfire was actually made of all the above forces holding such a brutal purge of criminals and cults that it uprooted millions of heretics and Reviticists. For those who don't know, Reviticists just means like really bad fucking criminals. And they literally burned them alive in the streets. Now, whilst the actual act of this may seem like a campaign of terror, it was all warranted. There were a lot of fat motherfuckers, both figuratively and literally on Terra. And Mr. Bobby G was not having any of that, baby. Corrupt government officials, cult magisters, high accolades, Terra nobility, nobody, literally nobody was safe. Such as a navigator. The consul preeminence of a navigator house tried to hold the crusade for ransom, as he wanted preferential treatment by the High Lords. Guilliman had him publicly flogged. Because you may be all high and mighty with everyone else, but Mr. Bobby G does not give a slightest fuck. And for those of you who know about navigators, they are super, super influential and super high up. But basically, Guilliman came over and he showed everybody, y'all may be hot shit, but I am the Emperor's son, and nothing is going to save you. Welcome to Ultramar, motherfuckers. And Bobby G did not relent. Even when Terra's hive cities spiraled into actual full-on war, he would not relent. He would continue and continue and continue until he was 100% satisfied that Terra had been completely purged. Now there was some collateral damage, but it would be a lot worse if it was not for the Adeptus Arbites. For the Adeptus Arbites are literally a military force of super elite, super loyal wardens and judges that answer directly to the Lex Imperialis above all, the Imperial Law. And whilst the Imperial Law is kind of in a little bit of a fucky place, Guilliman is working on a pseudo-new version. Mr. Bobby G is working on something called the Codex Imperialis. Basically, it's how not to be a fucking idiot book for the Imperium as a whole. And we're not sure of yet, but it's high chance that this includes a new law system. And we know for a fact, the minute Bobby G posts that thing, these judges of the arbitrators are going to follow that like gospel. Because it kind of technically is. But to sum up the Adeptus Arbites, they deal with rogue governors, interplanetary cartels and other crime syndicates. They don't care about petty crime, but if anything goes outside the bounds of a normal planet or involves heresy or dissedation or sedition of any forms, they get involved. They root out corruption, maintain tithes, and guard against witchery. Again, you have the standard arbitrators in the melee form or the vigilants in the range form, and then we have judges, which generally speaking are considered to be an elite version, or they could just be another name for the Arbites. In fact, they're so loyal that even the Inquisition likes recruiting them as acolytes or aides. They're well-trained, zealous, and fearless. And what's interesting is that while they do get along with the Inquisition, they really don't give a fuck about the Inquisition's authority. They are above even the Inquisition, for they give zero fucks. If the Arbites find out that an Inquisitor is in breach of the Lex in any way, shape, or form, they're going to hold him to task and make him give account. And when you consider that they have similar equipment to Inquisitors, it makes sense. And whilst they will indeed beat the absolute fuck out of civvies for causing civil unrest, that is only when they're deployed. The Arbites are rarely deployed. And whilst they do have a very heavy hand, that hand is rarely used, unlike the Inquisition. The Inquisition goes around looking for trouble. The Arbites mind their own business until terror calls for them. That is the main difference between the Inquisition and the Arbites. And to sum up the Adeptus Arbites, they are actually one of the more better organizations of the Imperium. Many times people often consider them to be mini Inquisitors, and whilst they may be equipped and trained as such, they lack something that the Inquisitors are a core aspect of. That being, personal. The Inquisitors are all about doing their own personal nonsense. Each inquisitorial sect with each Inquisitor is off doing his own whatever. He goes looking and searching for what he believes will best serve the Imperium. The Arbites though, they're all cut from the same cord of wood. They act when needed. They wait for the call. They do not go out looking for rubbish to happen. They are servants of the Imperial Lex, the law. And when they are deployed, it means someone has, without a single shred of a doubt, broken the law. And this is not a, oh, you saw a little bit of thing from over here. This is, you are inciting rebellion against an imperial world. You are fucking something up very, very bad. This is some type of alien, Xenos, or heretic cult uprising. This is a planetary rebellion. This is something that demands the absolute brute force of a super elite military in the guise of a police. Honestly, to me, if you were to look like a modern real-world equivalent, I would take a look at the French gendarme, or the gendarmerie. They are essentially a police force, but trained, armed, and equipped in a sort of pseudo-military fashion. And it's not that much of a foreign concept, and it's nice seeing it represented in 40k. But all in all, whilst yes, every single judge and arbitrator can be rather heavy-handed, and they aren't exactly the most sociable, each and every one of them at their very core hold a true sense of duty, of honor, and of upholding the law. There is a sort of righteous purity to them that you just don't see in other Imperial agents, especially the Inquisition. And honestly, it's kind of refreshing, because they're the definition of that old drill sergeant who's super stern but is good and is just. And they're actually one of my favorite units in all of Warhammer 40k purely because they subvert expectations. Yes, they're big, yes, they're mean, yes, they'll hit you on the head with a big stick, but if you genuinely have done nothing wrong, they will provide and protect for you and guide and keep you, which is something that you can't really say about a lot of other Imperial factions. And this is perfectly emphasized in the book The Last Council. Mere weeks before the Siege of Terra began during the Horus Heresy, the High Lords of Terra alongside Marco the Sigillite would hold their last council. Many topics were debated, and final preparations made for when the traitor War Master arrived on Terra. Grand Provost Marshal Rantal would, as the meeting closed its end, once again request resources be dedicated to the fortification of the Halls of Judgment, and he would again be denied. The High Lords argued. Other High Lords asked if Rantal would order his arbitrators to defend the palace, or other locations if it would be attacked. Rantal refused, saying, "We are peacekeepers, not a military force." The Adeptus Arbites also concerned itself with the growing civilian unrest and refugee crisis, but ultimately, Malcador used it as a segue to talk about said issue. The refugees were encamped around the Imperial Palace. They could not stay there. Some High Lords said that his duty should fall into the legions of Dawn and Sanguinius. Let the Astartes turn away the refugees. Others argued that to let Space Marines valiantly turn away those seeking safety on Terra, it would show that the unity of the Imperium would be ended. When the Chirurgeon General of the Ordo Hospitalis shamed the High Lords for cruelty, Malcador joined him, reminding each of the Lords that they and the refugees were all mortals. There was a long silence, and Malcador felt ashamed of the High Lords and other envoys, until one spoke. Surprisingly, it was Navigator Envoy Hardak Daika who spoke. "It pains my heart to see that the glorious Patra Nova, to know that these helpless people suffer in such great numbers, so close to the throne, and the protection they would seek in its shadow. I consider it an honor and a privilege to speak in behalf of the Terran houses of the Navas nobility, in pledging whatever monetary and logistical support is required to ensure that sanctuary is provided to all those within the areas in questions. We do not have the manpower to assist directly, but we may foot the bill from her own coffers. Chancellor Austin's brow furrowed. It is not necessarily a matter of finance, you understand. And I must regretfully remind you that this will not be deducted from the house's quarterly stipend. Hardaika shook his head plaintively. I would not hear of it. We do this to reaffirm our dedication to the welfare of the people of Terra. Sipping water from his fluted glass, Simeon Peterson stared down at the table in front of him. Self-funded, moving the refugees becomes a matter of will alone. Who among us, then, has the capacity to effectively police such an endeavor? All eyes fell to Marshal Rontal, but before he could respond, Kane's ambassador rose from his seat. Betha Hill was not well liked amongst the lords, perhaps even less so than her master, but she had proven herself a dedicated servant of both Mars and Terra. My lords, I would confer with the Fabricator General on the details, but I believe a solution can be found. We have the capacity to begin the fortification surveys requested by Grand Marshal Rontal upon the Halls of Judgment, if he would be willing to have his arbitrators take responsibility for the orderly and timely relocation of the civilian camps.
You're talking about a trade?
Not so much as a trade, Grand Marshal. Simply an agreement. An agreement that certain impossible things become more possible when we cooperate. But we should not feel compelled to aid these people because we seek mutual gain. We do it because it is the right thing to do. The kind thing to do. It is the human thing to do.
It will be done. We will begin with volunteers, so as not to diminish the enforcement watches in the meantime. Security first, then charity.
His choice of words grated on Malcador's nerves, but it was a start. That Rontal, Potassion, and the Mechanicus delegation could cooperate on anything was nothing short of miraculous. Nevertheless, Vahal gave Rontal a respectful nod before sitting once more. As the Corrosion General was about to ask for details, Malcador would reply, Details, my good man. Mere details. We have debated here far longer than planned, and time is too precious commodity in these unhappy days, said the Sigillite. It had been almost a week before the relocation began in earnest. Har Rontal, to his credit, devoted far more of his own time and energy than anyone had truly anticipated. Malcador saw him often among the refugees on the Avenue of Imperial Waking. Without his armor, the crested helm of his office, or his ceremonial maul, the Grand Provost Marshal appeared far less unapproachable. It would take time to speak with the people he was assisting, hearing their tales of fear and sorrow, and making sure they had fresh water and blankets before they were tallied for processing. Though there were countless other duties and observances expected of him, the Sigillite followed Rontal's example. He ignored the ache in his old bones and joined the administratum clerks at their makeshift desks, carefully scribing the names and origins of thousands of displaced civilians as they each stepped forward in turn. For all the cruelty, ruthlessness, and reported actions of the Adeptus Arbites and the Grand Provost Marshal on Terra, when push came to shove, they would stand with the people of the Imperium, the last line standing vigil against the horrors of the alien, mutant, and heretic. And I believe that sums up the Adeptus Arbites quite nicely. Very intense, very hardcore, and 100% would not be welcome in today's day and age. But in the grim darkness of the far future, they are honest, they are loyal, and they genuinely do care. Which, in Warhammer, is like a goddamn blessing sent from an angel. And all in all, they certainly have earned their place as one of my favorite units, and a unit I am absolutely looking forward to in playing in Darktide's new mode. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what y'all think down below. Comment, like, share, subscribe, doing the wonderful YouTube stuff. And I want to say a very massive thank you to you guys for watching. Even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Big shout out to my Officer Corps, starting off with my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Big shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Corns Butcher, Mr. Sean RL7, Mr. Bullwin, and Matthew Merrill. Shout out to my Corporal tier members, Tremail the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Shauna Smithers, and Mr. Tech Priest Toaster. And finally, but certainly not least, massive thank you to my awesome, amazing private tier, with Mr. Thomas Rose Lawns, Mr. Ivan SVW, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Torres Kurz, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortusunum, Mr. Gentle Salamander, Mr. CMD Neo, the Wench of Warhammer, Mr. Simon Kamu, and Mr. Dar Marek. Thank y'all. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Like and sub, join all of the awesome YouTube memberships and stuff, game early access videos, behind the scenes stuff, brand new, everything that happens on this channel, and most importantly, you get to support your boy and my own support. But remember, it's always be free. So whether you give your boy a dollar or not, I would love you just the same. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Belly 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Much to say honorable out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers.